Welcome to Creepy Mysteries. Before moving to the story, I just want to take a moment. Every story here is crafted to take you on a spine-chilling journey. If you enjoy what you hear and want more tales of the unknown, consider subscribing to the channel. It truly means the world to us. And if this story intrigued you, let us know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback helps us uncover even more mysteries to share with you. Now let's move on to the story. Long-haul trucking can be a lonely job, but that's part of why I liked it. The quiet hours on the road, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretches of highway were all things I found peaceful. But there's one night I'll never forget, one that made me question whether I'd ever drive alone at night again. It was a late November evening, and I was hauling a load through a remote stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The road was flanked by dense forests on either side, and the only light came from my headlights and the occasional flicker of stars through the clouds. There wasn't a single car in sight, just mile after mile of darkness. I was about 5 hours into my shift when the CB radio crackled to life. At first it was just static, which wasn't unusual, but then a voice came through. "Breaker 19. Driver, you got your ears on?" The voice was calm and smooth, with just a hint of static. I reached for the mic, happy to have some company, even if it was just a stranger. "Yeah, I'm here. What's up?" I replied. There was a brief pause before the voice spoke again. "Long night, huh? Looks like you're hauling a decent load there. That cab's looking real clean, too." My stomach dropped. That wasn't something you'd guess over the radio. I glanced around, but there was no one behind me. No headlights in my mirrors. The road was completely empty. "Yeah, it's a long one," I said carefully. "Where are you driving tonight?" Another pause. "Oh, I'm not far. Right behind you." My heart skipped a beat. I double-checked my mirrors. Still nothing. The highway stretched out behind me in total darkness. "Funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't see any lights back there." The voice chuckled, low and unsettling. "Maybe you're not looking hard enough." I felt a chill creep up my spine. I turned my eyes back to the road, gripping the wheel tighter. The CB stayed silent for a few moments, and I started to convince myself it was just a prank. Maybe some bored driver messing with me. But then the voice came back. "Careful up ahead. Don't want to miss that turn." I frowned. The road I was on didn't have any turns for miles. It was a straight shot through the forest until the next town. "What turn?" I asked. No answer. The radio went completely dead. I turned the volume knob, trying to bring it back to life, but all I got was static. Uneasy, I focused on the road, scanning the darkness ahead for anything unusual. About 10 minutes later, the voice came back. "Hey driver, watch for that deer." Before I could respond, something darted into the road ahead. A massive buck, its antlers silhouetted against my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding it as it bolted into the trees. My heart was pounding as I pulled over to the side of the road to catch my breath. The CB crackled again. "Close one, huh?" I grabbed the mic. "All right, who the hell is this? Are you following me?" No response. I sat there for a moment, scanning the mirrors in the tree line, but there was no sign of anyone. The forest was silent, and the only sound was the idling of my engine. After a while, I decided to keep moving. I had a deadline to meet, and I wasn't about to let some prankster throw me off. But as I drove, the voice continued. It would chime in every so often, commenting on things it shouldn't have known. The color of my truck, the name of the company printed on the side of the trailer, even the fact that I'd stopped at a diner 2 hours earlier. "You like that coffee from Carl's Diner?" the voice asked at one point. That was when I knew this wasn't just some bored trucker messing with me. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other end of that radio was watching me. I tried turning the CB off, but it wouldn't shut down. The static continued to buzz, and the voice broke through every few minutes. It started asking questions. "Where are you headed, driver? How much longer do you have? Are you sure you're alone?" That last question made my blood run cold. I glanced toward the sleeper cab behind me, half expecting to see someone sitting there. It was empty, of course, but the idea that someone might be nearby, or worse in the truck, wouldn't leave my mind. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over at a small truck stop. the first sign of civilization I'd seen in hours. The parking lot was empty except for one other truck, its engine off and its cab dark. I parked as far from it as I could and climbed out, needing to feel the cold air on my face. The CB buzzed again, louder this time. The voice was different now, deeper, more distorted. "Don't stop, driver. You're almost there." "Almost where?" I yelled, slamming the door of the cab. The radio fell silent. That's when I noticed something strange. The other truck in the lot, it wasn't there anymore. I hadn't heard an engine start, hadn't seen any lights, but it was gone, leaving nothing but an empty parking space. I didn't waste any more time. I climbed back into my truck and floored it, speeding down the highway as fast as I could. The voice didn't come back for the rest of the drive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I finally reached my destination and parked at the depot, I checked the CB radio one last time. It was completely off, like it had never been on in the first place. To this day, I don't know who or what was on that radio. I've asked other drivers if they have experienced anything similar, but no one has. Whatever it was, it knew things it shouldn't have known, and it wasn't just following me. It was leading me somewhere. I've avoided that stretch of highway ever since. Some things on the road are better left unexplained. I've been a trucker for nearly 15 years, and in that time, I've had my fair share of strange experiences on the road. But there's one I'll never forget. One that still makes me uneasy every time I head out for a long haul at night. It happened about 5 years ago, in the dead of winter. I was hauling a load through a remote mountain pass that wound its way through thick, snow-covered woods. It was a dangerous stretch of road, full of sharp turns and steep drops, with little to no guardrails. On top of that, the weather was awful. Thick fog had settled over the pass, and snow was coming down hard, making visibility almost non-existent. I was alone on the road, which wasn't surprising. Most drivers avoided this route in bad weather, but I was on a tight schedule and didn't have much choice. My headlights barely cut through the fog, and all I could see was the narrow, icy road ahead. A little after midnight, I caught sight of something in my side mirror. Headlights. They appeared out of nowhere, bright and glaring, and they were getting closer. At first I was relieved. Another truck meant I wasn't completely alone out here. But as the vehicle closed the distance, I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't just catching up to me, it was barreling down the road at an impossible speed. I eased up on the gas, figuring I'd let the guy pass. But when I slowed down, so did the truck behind me. Its headlights stayed fixed in my mirrors, blinding and relentless. I gave a quick flash of my lights, signaling that it was clear to pass, but the truck didn't move. It just stayed there, tailgating me, its engine rumbling faintly over the sound of my own. At this point, my nerves were shot. I was already tense from the weather, and now I had some lunatic riding my bumper in the middle of nowhere. I tried to focus on the road, but those lights were relentless, glaring into my mirrors like a predator stalking its prey. Finally, I decided to pull over. There was a small turnout up ahead, barely wide enough for my rig, but it would have to do. I slowed down and eased onto the shoulder, expecting the truck to speed past me, but it didn't. As I came to a stop, the headlights behind me vanished. I blinked, thinking maybe they'd been swallowed by the fog. But when I looked closer, the road was empty. There was no truck, no taillights, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel and trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe the truck had turned off onto a side road I hadn't noticed. Or maybe the fog was playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, a low, guttural rumble, like the sound of an engine idling. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, coming from somewhere in the fog. I rolled down my window and leaned out, straining to see or hear anything more. That's when I noticed something strange. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and there was a faint smell of burning oil. Suddenly, the rumble grew louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was in front of me. I snapped my head forward just in time to see a pair of headlights cutting through the fog. They were coming straight at me. I barely had time to react. I slammed on the horn and threw the truck into gear, pulling back onto the road just as the headlights came hurtling toward me. But as they passed, I realized there was no truck attached to them. The lights shot by, vanishing into the fog as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving nothing behind but an empty road and the echo of my own panicked breathing. I didn't stop again after that. I kept driving, white-knuckling the wheel as the fog seemed to close in around me. My radio was silent, my phone had no signal, and the only thing keeping me sane was the rhythmic hum of the engine. About an hour later, I reached a small town at the base of the mountain. I pulled into a diner, desperate for a break and some human interaction. As I sat at the counter sipping a cup of hot coffee, I mentioned the phantom truck to the waitress. Her face went pale. "You're not the first driver to say that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me about a trucker who had lost control on that pass decades ago, during a similar snowstorm. His rig had gone off the edge, tumbling into the ravine below. They never recovered his body, and for years afterward, drivers had reported seeing strange headlights on the pass. Headlights that would follow them or block the road, only to vanish into thin air. I didn't sleep much that night, and I haven't taken that route since. Whatever I encountered on that mountain wasn't just another driver. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. And every time I drive through thick fog, I find myself glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see those headlights again. Being a trucker often means spending long hours on the road, crossing through isolated stretches of land where you don't see another soul for miles. I've always liked the solitude, but one night, during a haul I'll never forget, I realized that solitude isn't always safe. It was a cold autumn night, the kind where the air is damp and fog clings to the road like a heavy blanket. I was on a remote highway cutting through miles of dense forest. My destination was still a few hours away, and I hadn't seen another car for what felt like an eternity. The rhythmic hum of the truck engine was the only sound keeping me company. That's when I saw him. Out of the corner of my eye, a figure appeared on the shoulder of the road. A man standing there in the dark, illuminated only by my headlights. He was wearing a dark coat and had a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He raised his hand, signaling for me to stop. I'm usually not one to pick up hitchhikers, but something about him made me pause. Maybe it was the remote location or the fact that he looked genuinely desperate. Against my better judgment, I slowed the truck and pulled over. He jogged up to the passenger side window, his breath visible in the cold night air. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, clean-shaven, and polite. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice steady but tired. "My car broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for hours." I hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. "Hop in," I said. He climbed into the cab, placing his bag on the floor between his feet. As I started driving again, we made small talk. He told me his name was Rick and that he was heading to a nearby town. He didn't say much else, and I didn't push. The ride was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Rick stared straight ahead, his hands resting on his knees. Something about him felt off. His clothes were damp, like he'd been out in the rain, but I hadn't driven through any storms. And then there was the smell, a faint metallic odor I couldn't place. As we continued down the road, I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe I was just tired. But then Rick spoke, breaking the silence. "Have you ever seen something on the road you couldn't explain?" he asked, his voice calm but oddly distant. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He turned his head slowly to look at me, his expression blank. "Things that shouldn't be there. Things you can't explain, no matter how hard you try." I laughed nervously. "I've seen some weird stuff, sure, but nothing too crazy. Why?" Rick didn't answer. He just stared at me for a moment before turning his gaze back to the road. The unease in my chest grew. Something wasn't right about this guy, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I decided to keep driving and drop him off as soon as we reached the next town. About 20 minutes later, I saw lights in the distance. A gas station, its neon sign glowing faintly through the fog. I slowed down, figuring I'd stop and let Rick out there. "Here's a good spot for you," I said, pulling into the lot. But when I turned to look at him, the passenger seat was empty. My heart skipped a beat. The door was still locked, and there was no way he could have gotten out without me noticing. I looked around frantically, half expecting to see him standing outside, but the lot was deserted. Confused and rattled, I got out of the truck and checked the cab, the trailer, even underneath the vehicle. He was gone, completely gone. I climbed back into the driver's seat, my mind racing. Had I imagined him? Was I just exhausted? But then I saw it. On the seat where he'd been sitting was a wet, muddy footprint. I froze, staring at it. The metallic smell was still lingering in the air, stronger now. And as I sat there trying to make sense of what had just happened, I felt a chill run down my spine. The duffel bag. It was still on the floor, right where he'd left it. My first instinct was to toss it out of the truck, but curiosity got the better of me. I reached down, unzipped the bag, and instantly regretted it. Inside were clothes, shoes, and something else. A hunting knife, stained with what looked like dried blood. I slammed the bag shut and threw it out of the truck, my hands trembling. My first thought was to call the police, but when I looked at my phone, I had no signal. I didn't stay at that gas station long. I drove straight to the next town, not stopping until I reached a well-lit truck stop. I told the workers there what had happened, and they called the local authorities. When the police arrived, they asked me to describe Rick. As I recounted the story, one of the officers exchanged a nervous glance with his partner. "That sounds a lot like a guy we've been looking for," he said. "A drifter. He's been hitchhiking and robbing people, but last week he killed a driver not far from here." My blood ran cold. The officer continued, "But here's the thing. We found his body 2 days ago. Someone shot him and left him in a ditch. There's no way you picked him up tonight." I didn't know what to say. I still don't. But every time I think about that night, I can't help but wonder. Was Rick's ghost still wandering that road, looking for his next ride? Or was it something worse? All I know is that I'll never pick up a hitchhiker again. Not after that. That's for today from Creepy Mysteries. Hope you enjoyed the stories. If you enjoyed the stories and want more tales that send chills down your spine, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And remember, the scariest stories are often the ones that feel a little too real. Until next time, stay safe and stay in the light.